Hello everyone, it's Crystal. Thank you for joining me today as I show you how to make a simple elastic waist skirt. I am not adding pockets to this skirt. When I started sewing garments way back in 2016, 2017, I needed to upgrade my wardrobe and I needed to do it quickly. So a simple elastic waist skirt is a great way to quickly add items to your wardrobe. Pockets are more labor intensive, so I just decided to skip that when I first started sewing garments. Before we start cutting fabric and sewing, we need to do a little math. First, we need to measure our waist. For example, say you have a 30-inch waist. We're not going to do anything with that number right now, but we need to know what it is. Then you need a measuring tape, something similar to this, something that you can wrap around your body. Then you will measure your hips at the widest point. Usually that's over your behind, the widest part, the most full part of your behind, and the fullest part of your hips. So we will do something with that number. So say you have 40-inch at the widest part. Then you will add a 1 inch for your seam allowance, because I use a 1/2 inch marking on my sewing machine when I sew garments. So now we're at 41 inches. And then, depending on how much ease you want in your skirt, if you're using knit fabric, you probably don't want any ease because the knit fabric will stretch. If you're using woven fabric like I am, you will want to make sure you have some ease so that you can move around, you can sit down, and your seams won't rip. Your stitches won't rip, excuse me. So say, for example, you want to add a total of 3 inches on each side. So that's 6 inches. So that would be of ease. So one part of your measurements will be 47 inches. Then you determine the length of your skirt. I usually do 27 inches from my waist to where I want the skirt to land. So 27. But you will determine that. You could take your tape measure, and I usually let this part fall down my leg, and then and I put this end on my waist, and say if I wanted 30 inches, that's the number that goes here. However long you want to have your skirt, but always let this part fall down your leg so that it'll be easy to measure. So 27 inches. So I usually, if you have a serger and you're going to serge your fabric, then you only need to fold up once. But if you don't have a serger, and you will need to hide those raw edges. So for just ease of calculation, I usually just add 1 inch, but I usually just fold up my hem. I usually just fold it up a 1/2 inch, but just some people have to fold up twice because they don't have a serger or their machine won't do an interlocking stitch. So just for ease of measurement, add 1 inch for the hem, and then we're at 28. And I'm using a 1 inch wide elastic. So I usually make my casing 1.5 inches so that the elastic can move inside of the casing. I'm just taking the fabric, folding it over to make a little pocket for my elastic. So 1 inch elastic, my casing height will be 1.5, and I multiply it by 2 because I need to fold over my fabric. So we add 3 inches for the casing. And so we're at 31 inches. So our fabric will be, the fabric that we will cut will be the 47 and the 31. If you're buying garment fabric is usually 58 to 60 inches wide. So this will be covered. And then you would just have to cut the 31 inches in the length. Some things to consider. If you are using knit fabric for your skirt, you need to see where the stretch is. If you stretch the fabric and the stretch is this way will have to be around your hips. Make sure the stretch is in the right direction because you don't want your skirt to droop. Another thing, before you make garments, you should always wash your fabric. You wouldn't want to make a garment, wear it once, wash it, and then it shrinks and you can never wear it again. So wash your fabric before you cut into it and before you start sewing. So our person here will cut her fabric 47 inches by 31 inches. I have my fabric cut. I am using woven fabric, and I have a serger, but it's packed away. So I have to decide if I'm going to unpack my serger or just do an overlocking stitch on my sewing machine. I have to find out what that stitch is. So I've cut, this is my rectangle. I've cut it hips and length, and it's a woven fabric. It's an African wax fabric, so there's a wax coating on top. So this is the selvage. I never cut off the selvage, but I always serge it anyway because I will probably use this when I do my elastic casing. So I will take my serger or my sewing machine and I will do an overlocking stitch around all four sides of my fabric. Then I will come back and I will show you what I need to do to sew the next seam. The seam will be in the back. It will be a rear seam. Like I said, I will do 1/2 inch on my sewing machine, and I will show you the fabric after I've done my serging and after I've done my rear seam. I will be back. Well, I just tried to do the overlock stitch on my sewing machine and it was taking too long. So I unpacked my serger and did my 3-thread narrow overlocking stitch around all four sides of the fabric. I did the right side facing up when I was on my serger. Then I went to my sewing machine and I did pretty sides together and I sewed my rear hem, my rear seam. So I started at the bottom. This is going to be the bottom of my skirt. So you always start at the bottom so that you can make sure that your hem will be straight. So I started from the bottom, 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side, and I sewed all the way to the top. This is the top of my skirt. This is where the waistband will be. So my next step is to press this seam open. Now to press the seam open and then fold up the bottom to make my hem. I know that some places sell metal seam guides. I have not purchased one yet, but I took some old file folders and I just cut this strip. This is 1/2 inch. This is 1 inch, and then this is 2 inches. So I cut these. The 2-inch one is for, I was ambitious one day. I decided I wanted to make curtains. So this is why I made this. That's a story for another day, but 1 inch and 1/2 inch. So this is just a file folder, so you see it's sort of thick. I am going to buy one. I have one on my list for Amazon, but I don't really need it that often. So that's why I figured my homemade ones will hold me for the moment. So I'm going to go to my iron. I'm going to press, this is my rear seam, press my rear seam open, and then use my 1/2 inch guide to fold up, to press it, and then I'm going to start from the this intersection right here in the back, and I'm going to sew my hem, and I'll be back to show you the next step. Oh, also, nope, while I'm there, I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to fold this over my 1.5. This is the top. This is where my waistband elastic will be. I'm going to also fold this over, and then I'm going to sew. I'm only going to sew this partially. Once I fold it and I press it, I'm going to go to the ironing. I'm going to go back to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew this closed, but I'm going to leave this open from my left hand to my right hand. I'm going to leave this about 4-inch opening, and that's where the elastic will be threaded through. So my next step is to go to my iron, press, then go to my sewing machine, press the hem all the way closed, and sew the hem all the way closed, and sew the elastic casing just partially. So when I come back, I will show you how to thread the how to cut the elastic and how to thread it through the casing. So here's the inside of my skirt. This is the bottom. This is the hem. I fed my skirt through my sewing machine this way. I moved my needle all the way over to the left, and I lined up the left side of my presser foot with this edge right here. And so I sewed all the way around till I got back to the beginning. This is how the hem looks from the pretty side of the skirt. And for my casing, I always add my label. This label is 1.5 inches square. I bought them from Dutch Label Shop. So my casing obviously is a little bigger, but I always sew my label on, and then I fold my casing so that I have room for my elastic. So this top part of stitching is optional. I just like the way it looks when it's finished. You see, this is the top stitching, this is the bottom stitching. So my elastic will be encased in this area. So for the bottom, I left this area empty, left this area open, excuse me. I put this clip here so I knew where to stop because I started here and went around the skirt waistband. So this is to mark where I stopped. Same thing for here. I moved my needle all the way over to the left, and I lined up my presser foot with this edge. And for the top, I actually did the top first. I moved my needle all the way over to the right, and I lined up my presser foot with this fold here. So now we have this area that's open. This is where the elastic goes. So I buy my elastic in bulk. This roll was 70 yards when it started. So I just take some, fold it in half. That's why we need our waist measurement. In our example, the waist was 30 inches. So we know that we need this to be around 30 inches so it can fit around the waist. But we need to stretch. So stretch, we put our fold on a line on our cutting mat, and then we stretch to see how far it goes. So if we can stretch it so that this width will fit around our hips, whatever our hips is. In our example, our hips are 40. So if I put this on 10 and I can stretch it to 30, that's 20 and 20, that's 40. This will fit around the hips. So that's how I measure my elastic. So you can buy elastic in smaller quantities, but I find that works well for me. Fold it in half so at least my waist measurement is covered. And then I stretch it to make sure it fits around my hips. If it doesn't, then I might add an inch or two, just incrementally. And then the elastic stretches over time. So you don't want it to be You want it to be as snug as possible without being tight so that you can prepare for the future. And this is my elastic. I've already cut it, and here's my safety pin. So we take our skirt. This is the top of the skirt. We take our safety pin, and then we just feed the elastic through the casing, making sure that it stays flat. We don't want it to get twisted. We want it to stay flat, and we will feed it all the way through. I just push the safety pin and grab it, push, grab it, and I always check to make sure that my elastic is still flat. I hold the end of my elastic in my right hand, hold it like this. You see it's still straight. And then I hold it as I'm feeding. And I'm always checking to make sure my elastic is still flat. Just checking to make sure it's still flat. It is. Now I switch hands for holding the elastic. Now I'm holding the elastic in my left hand, but it's still flat. And I will check before I join the two ends. One thing to be mindful of, if you do an elastic waist skirt and you have pockets, you will have side seams that you need to maneuver past. So just be mindful of that if you decide that you want to add pockets to your skirt one day. So here we are back at the beginning. I'm going to just make sure that I am still flat. Not going to. Right. All right, so I am flat all the way around. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine. And I'm going to overlap about an inch. And then I'm going to do a zigzag stitch. I do a zigzag stitch over this end here. Flip it over, do it over this end. And then I do a zigzag stitch in the middle. I go forwards and backwards several times. So I go feed it through here. So go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6. Cut my thread, flip this over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Forward and back. And then in the middle. 6 times, 6 or 7, however many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Cut my thread, and then I will close up this opening. I will move my needle over, close that up, and then we will be done. After I do that, I will show you my finished skirt.